The lamp on the 17th floor of the Signal Sol had a shade the color of steamed rice, and beneath it, on a lacquered side table that had been polished that morning by a woman who would be dismissed by Friday, sat a small brass key on a length of red thread. The key was old. The thread was older. It belonged to a wooden medicine cabinet in a house 41 kilometers away in Yangpyeong, in a room where an elderly woman was, at that precise moment, being helped into a linen nightgown by a pair of hands that were not her son's. The key had been left on the table by no one anyone in the hotel could remember. The night manager, when questioned 2 weeks later by a prosecutor's investigator, would say only that it had appeared sometime between the changing of the flowers at 6:12 p.m. and the delivery of the ice bucket at 7:34 p.m. on the 17th of November, and that he had assumed, as one assumes many things in that hotel, that it belonged to a guest who preferred discretion. 11 floors below, in the lobby bar that faced the garden fountain the architects had installed to muffle the sound of the traffic on Songpadero, Kang Min-jae sat with a glass of chilled Andong soju and did not drink it. He was 41 years old. He wore a navy overcoat that had cost more than the night manager downstairs earned in a year, and beneath it, a white shirt his tailor in Cheongdam had cut for him on a Tuesday in October, the buttons still cool against his chest because he had come in from the December air only 11 minutes earlier. His fiancée had gone up to the suite to rest. The engagement gala at the Schilla had ended at 9:14 p.m. His mother had begged off at 10, citing the cold. He had been sitting in the bar now for 22 minutes, doing what a man does when the world has finally arranged itself in his favor, and he cannot, for reasons he does not yet understand, feel any of it. His mother had once told him, when he was 19 and stupid with new money, that a house without a woman kneeling in it at night was not a house, but a warehouse with lamps. He had laughed then. He remembered laughing. He remembered her not laughing back. He remembered her looking at the wall behind him, at the framed photograph of his Halmione holding him at his 100-day rice ceremony, and he remembered her saying nothing for a long time, and then getting up to check the doenjang. He had thought at the time that she was being sentimental. He had thought many things at 19. He would think, 22 years later and 11 floors beneath a brass key on a red thread, that almost none of them had been right. He was Kang Min-jae. He was, according to the last set of papers he had signed at 4:12 p.m. that afternoon, in a boardroom on the 41st floor of a building his brotherhood did not officially own. The acting chairman of Seongdo Holdings, a construction and logistics group that had, through 11 layers of nominees and a bank in Labuan, absorbed the maritime freight arm of a chaebol whose patriarch had died the previous spring. He owned an apartment in Hanam-dong with a view of the river, a house in Pyeongchang-dong he never slept in, and a hanok in Bukchon he had bought for his mother in 2019, and to which she had refused, politely and firmly, to move. He had, 3 years earlier, in a district court in Seocho, signed a divorce decree from a woman named Adayez Kang, née Okafor, born in Enugu, educated at Yonsei, and then at the London School of Economics, a forensic accountant with a specialization in cross-border asset tracing, whom his advisors had, from the second month of the marriage, considered a liability. He was, as of that morning, engaged to Ji Yeon of the Hun family, a young woman of 29, whose grandfather had once shaken hands with 3 presidents, and whose mother wore only white in the winter. The marriage would consolidate 4 billion won of shipping contracts, 1 seat on a museum board, and the kind of political air cover a man in his position was told, by men older than him, he could not afford to refuse. On paper, his mother had warned him 3 times. The first warning had been a bowl of doenjang jjigae at her table in Yangpyeong on a Sunday in April. The anchovy broth too salty because her hand had shaken pouring the myolchi, and she had said nothing about the shaking, and neither had he. The second had been a closed gate. He had driven up on a Tuesday unannounced to bring her a box of pears from Naju, and had found the wooden gate of the hanok latched from the inside at 11 in the morning. And when she had opened it, she had smiled at him, the way a woman smiles at a stranger she is choosing, out of kindness, not to embarrass. The third had been a glance across the table at the engagement dinner 2 weeks before the gala, when Ji Yeon had reached to refill his glass, and his mother had watched Ji Yeon's hand, and then looked at him, and then looked, deliberately and for a long moment, at the empty chair to his left. He had thought at the time that she was tired. He had been wrong. He did not yet know how wrong. The message came at 9:47 p.m. It was a text from a number his phone did not recognize, sent from a burner purchased in cash for 38,000 won at a convenience store in Mapo-gu at 3:17 that afternoon, a purchase captured by a security camera whose footage would be preserved for 41 days by municipal ordinance. The text contained no words. It contained an address he already knew, his mother's house in Yangpyeong, and a photograph taken from the doorway of her bedroom of a woman kneeling beside her bed, adjusting a pillow. He could not see the woman's face. He could see her hands. He had, at one point in his life, known those hands better than his own. He finished the soju. He did not hurry. He made one phone call to his driver, Old Bae, who had been with him since he was 24, and who answered on the first ring the way he had always answered on the first ring. And he said only, Yangpyeong. He waited 41 minutes in the lobby because his fiancée was still upstairs, and he did not, for reasons he could not yet name, want her to come with him. He told her when she came down at 10:28 in a cashmere coat the color of dry oats that his mother had asked to see them both. He did not tell her about the photograph. He did not tell her about the key on the 17th floor. He did not, he would realize later, tell her many things he should have told her from the beginning. The drive to Yangpyeong took an hour and 14 minutes at that hour, the expressway thinning past Hanam, the Han River widening on their left into a long black ribbon that caught the moon in pieces. Ji Yeon slept for part of it with her cheek against the window. Old Bae did not speak. Min Jae watched the passing towns, Namyangju, Yangsuri, the exit for Dumul Maori where the two rivers met, and thought, without wanting to, of a January in 2016 when he had driven this same road in a different car with a different woman and had stopped at a rest area outside Yangsuri because she had been 6 months pregnant and had needed to eat, and he had bought her a hot dog from a vendor whose name he had never asked, and she had cried, quietly, over the paper cup, because it had been sweeter than she had expected. The child had been born in April of that year at Samsung Medical Center. The child had died in October of the following year on the 14th floor of Asan Medical Center of a congenital cardiac malformation that Dr. Huang, the pediatric cardiologist, had explained in a room with gray carpet using words Min Jae had not, in that moment, been able to hear. The child had been called Chidinma Hyerin Kong. Chidinma meant God is good in Igbo. Hyerin meant grace and wisdom in Hangul. She had lived 17 months and 11 days. She was buried in a cemetery in Paju under a stone that carried both names and one date. They arrived at 11:47 p.m. The gate was open. The lights in the hanok were low, the way his mother always kept them after 10, and the smell coming from the kitchen, anchovy broth, the good kind, the kind that took 6 hours, reached them at the doorway. The house manager, an old woman named Mrs. An, who had worked for his mother for 22 years, met them in the entryway with her hands folded and her eyes lowered in a way he had not seen since his father's funeral. "Your mother has already gone to bed," she said. He smiled. "We'll surprise her," he said. He took Ji Yeon's hand. He climbed the stairs. The bedroom door was ajar. The lamp inside was on, dimmed to the amber his mother preferred. He pushed the door open with 2 fingers, and then he stopped. And the world he had spent 41 years arranging into its correct shape rearranged itself, silently and completely, around a scene he had not authored. Daisy was kneeling beside the bed. She was wearing a gray wool sweater he did not recognize, and jeans and thick socks the color of oatmeal. Her hair, which she had cut short since he had last seen her, was pulled back with a plain black band. She had lost weight, not the sharp weight of grief he remembered from Paju, but the softer weight of a woman who had learned, in a discipline he did not understand, how to sit for long hours at another person's bedside without eating. In her left hand, she held a small blue and white porcelain cup. In her right, a folded handkerchief. On the bedside table beside her, arranged in the order in which they were to be taken, sat 4 bottles of medication, a jug of warm water, and a wooden pill box with the days of the week written in Hangul in his mother's own handwriting. She had, at that moment, just finished tucking the blanket around his mother's shoulders. She was adjusting the pillow. She was humming, so softly he almost did not hear it, an old lullaby his Halmione used to sing to him in the summer kitchen in the Hanok in Andong, a song about a magpie and a persimmon tree that he had not heard in 29 years. His mother's eyes were open. His mother was looking at Adaez the way she had once looked at his father across a table at their 40th wedding anniversary, with the quiet, unshowy peace of a woman who has decided that the person in front of her belongs, finally and without argument, in her house. "Good night, my daughter," his mother whispered. Adaezi leaned forward and kissed the elderly woman's forehead. "Sleep well, Eomeoni," she said. Then his mother turned her head on the pillow and looked at the doorway, and she saw them. And she did not startle, and she did not apologize, and she did not, in any way he could measure, appear to feel that she had been caught at anything. She smiled. "You're home," she said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. If you are already sitting inside this room with him, if the air has changed in the room where you are watching, if you feel the weight of the blanket and the porcelain and the 22 years of the house manager's silence, then pause the video for 1 breath and subscribe to Midnight Love Saga. Tap the bell so the next chapter finds you the moment it drops. What is about to be said in the next 28 minutes will unmake your understanding of loyalty in 7 places and rebuild it with something quieter, harder, and far more human than what you walked in with. Stay. You are going to want to be in the room for what she says next, and for what the doctor says after her, and for what the mother says at breakfast. And when it is over, tell me one thing in the comments. Who in your own life kept showing up for your people long after you stopped deserving it? And what did you do the day you finally noticed? To understand what happened in that bedroom in Yangpyeong at 11:53 p.m. on the 17th of November, you have to go back 11 years and 4 months to a city that no longer exists in either of their memories the way it actually was. They met in the winter of 2014 at a fundraising dinner in the ballroom of the Four Seasons Seoul that had been organized by a foundation neither of them had any real interest in. She was 26 and finishing a research fellowship at Yonsei on the 6-month leg of a joint program with the LSE that was to end in the spring. He was 30 and had, 6 weeks earlier, buried his father in a cemetery outside Paju, a burial he had attended in a suit that had not fit properly because he had lost weight in the 2 weeks his father had been dying, and no one had told him to have the suit altered. She had been seated across from him at a round table of 10, and he had noticed first her hands, long fingers, no rings, a small burn scar on the inside of the left wrist from a childhood in a kitchen in Enugu, where her mother had made egusi soup on a kerosene stove. And then, only afterwards, her face. She had spoken Korean carefully and imperfectly, with the accent of a person who had learned it in a classroom and not on a street, and she had, when he had made a small joke about the wine, laughed the way a person laughs who has been alone in a foreign country for a long time and has forgotten, briefly, that she was. He had asked her, at the end of the evening, whether she would like to see the fish market in Noryangjin at 4 in the morning. She had said yes, without asking why. They had gone. She had eaten raw octopus for the first time in her life on a plastic stool under a fluorescent light, while an old woman in rubber boots hosed down the floor around them. She had, in the taxi home at 6, told him about her older sister, who had died in a car accident on the Enugu-Onitsha Expressway in 2008 at the age of 29, and she had said the sister's name, Chiamaka, which meant God is beautiful. And he had not, at the time, understood why she had told him that on the first night. He would understand, 12 years later, in a room in Yangpyeong, why she had told him. They were married in April of 2015, in a small ceremony at his mother's hanok, with fewer than 30 guests. His mother had, 3 days before the wedding, sat Adais down at the kitchen table and taken her hands, and said, in careful English, she had rehearsed with the housekeeper, "You are my daughter now. Not the wife of my son, my daughter. Say it back to me." Adais had said it back. His mother had, from that day forward, never called her by any other word. Chidinma Hyerin was born the following April at Samsung Medical Center, 7 pounds and 1 ounce, with her mother's hands and her father's mouth. She had lived 17 months and 11 days. She had died on the 14th floor of Asan Medical Center on the 3rd of October, 2017, at 4:12 in the morning, of a congenital cardiac defect that had been missed on 2 earlier scans by a pediatric cardiologist who had, 6 months later, been quietly removed from his post. Min Jae had not attended the removal. He had not attended much of anything for 11 months after the funeral. He had gone, instead, into the expansion of the freight arm and into the acquisitions in Vladivostok, and then in Singapore, and into a version of himself that his mother had watched with a stillness he had mistaken, at the time, for approval. The marriage had not survived the child. Few marriages do. Adais had gone back to work in the 8th month, quietly, at a forensic accounting firm in Yeouido, and had begun, in a way he had not noticed then and could only reconstruct now, to build the kind of professional life that did not require him to come home at a particular hour. He had begun, in the same months, to come home at no particular hour. There had been no other woman. He wanted to say that clearly, to himself, in the car on the way to Yangpyeong. There had been no other woman. There had been, instead, a slow architecture of avoidance, an emptying of the small daily rituals, the shared breakfast, the evening walk along the river, the Sunday yeza for his father, into which the marriage had, for a time, poured itself. The divorce had been filed in the summer of 2022 and finalized in the autumn. She had asked for nothing. She had signed everything her lawyer put in front of her without amendment. She had, on the last day, at the courthouse in Seocho, taken off the ring and set it on the table between them and said, in Korean, "Take care of your mother, Min Jae ya." He had not answered. He had watched her walk out of the room in a dark gray coat he had not seen before, and he had assumed, because he had been 38 and stupid in a different way now, that this was the last time he would see her. He had been wrong about that too. She had begun, 6 weeks after the divorce, to accompany his mother to her appointments at Severance Hospital. She had met her by accident in the waiting room on the fourth floor of the neurology wing on a Wednesday morning in November of 2022. His mother had been there for what the neurologist had, 3 months earlier, diagnosed as the early stages of a degenerative neurological condition of a specific and slowly progressive variety, the details of which had been recorded in a chart under the case number NR-2022-4187. His mother had not told him. She had told no one. She had gone alone to the appointment because she had not wanted to burden him during the Vladivostok negotiations, and she had, in the waiting room, mistaken a form for one she had already filled out, and Adaizi had, seeing her hands shaking as she tried to hold the pen, come over and helped her without introducing herself. And then, only when his mother had looked up and recognized her, had she said quietly in the Korean she had by then perfected, Aomeoni. From that day forward, for 3 years, Adaizi had gone to every appointment. She had reorganized the medication schedule, which the household staff had been managing badly, into a system his mother could follow with the wooden pill box on her bedside table. She had hired, out of her own money, a physical therapist named Ms. Park, who came to the Hanok in Yangpyeong 3 mornings a week. She had installed grab rails in the bathroom, a raised seat in the shower, and a small alarm pendant his mother wore on a silk cord under her nightgown. She had gone through his mother's kitchen and rewritten every recipe his mother had cooked from memory into a notebook bound in navy cloth, so that the cook, on the days his mother could not remember, could still produce the dishes his mother wanted to eat. She had planted, in the small garden outside his mother's bedroom window, 41 stems of white chrysanthemums and a single persimmon sapling, because his mother had told her on a June afternoon in 2023 that her own mother's garden in Andong had held both. She had asked of the household one thing: please don't tell him. I don't want him to feel guilty. And the household, Mrs. An, the cook, old Bay's cousin who tended the garden, the physical therapist, the neurologist's secretary, had kept the request the way old Korean households keep the requests of daughters. Absolutely. She had done all of this while running a caseload at her firm that included, by the summer of 2024, 3 cross-border investigations into a shell structure that his brotherhood had, without his direct knowledge, been using to move funds through a bank in Labuan, a nominee company in the Caymans, and an art dealership in Zurich. She had not been assigned the cases. She had asked for them. She had asked for them because she had, in the 2nd year of accompanying his mother to Severance, begun to notice things. His mother had begun, in the summer of 2024, to receive visits from a man Adaiz did not recognize. The man had come 3 times, always on afternoons when Min Jae was known to be abroad, always carrying a small paper bag from a bakery in Cheongdam, and a document folder that he had, on each visit, asked his mother to sign. He had introduced himself as an old friend of the family. Adaizi, who had by then spent enough time in the Hanok to know every old friend of the family by name, had not recognized him. She had, on the 3rd visit, asked Mrs. An for the man's business card, which he had left on the entryway console. She had photographed it. She had run the name, that night, at her desk in Uido, against a database her firm had built for anti-money laundering compliance work. The name had matched in the 3rd layer of a nominee structure, an entity called Seongdo Maritime Trust, registered in Labuan on the 14th of March, 2019, with a beneficial ownership that resolved, after 11 layers, to a man Min Jae had called Hyung Nim since he was 22. Hyung Nim was Cho Tai-hoon, 49 years old. the eldest son of the sworn brother of Min Jae's late father, a man who had, at Min Jae's wedding in 2015, given a toast in which he had wept and called Min Jae his real younger brother. Hyung Nim had been, since 2019, quietly moving 4,300,000,000 won of Seongdo's overseas receipts through the Labuan Trust into accounts in his own control. He had, in the same period, been arranging for Min Jae's mother to sign documents she did not fully understand, transferring the deed of the Bukchon Hanok and a small parcel of land in Andong into the trust as collateral against loans the trust had never intended to repay. 3 people had, in the course of Adayezi's investigation, died. A junior compliance officer at the Labuan Bank named Rahim bin Yusuf had drowned in a hotel pool in Kuala Lumpur in May of 2024. The coroner had ruled it accidental, though the pool had been closed at the hour of his death, and no one had been able to explain how he had entered it. A courier in Singapore named Lim Wei Ling had been struck by a delivery van on Beach Road in July. The driver had never been identified. And an old accountant in Seoul named Mr. Bayek, who had worked for Min Jae's father for 31 years, and who had, on a Tuesday in September, asked Adayez to meet him for tea at a cafe in Icheondong, had died the night before the meeting of what Severance Hospital had recorded as a myocardial infarction at the age of 68, in his apartment in Mapo-gu, alone. Adayez had, by the second week of November, assembled a folder: bank records from Labuan, wire confirmations from the Caymans, a notarized statement from a former secretary of the trust who had defected in Zurich, a coroner's note on Mr. Bayek from a pathologist she had gone to school with at Yonsei. She had assembled it not for a court. She had assembled it because she had known, from the pattern of visits and the acceleration of the signatures, that Hyung Nim was preparing to close the operation, and that when he closed it, he would need Min Jae removed from the chairmanship in a way that could not be undone. "They will not need him alive," she had written in a private note to herself on the 14th of November, and she had underlined the sentence once. She had brought the folder to Yangpyeong on the 17th because she had known from Mrs. An that Min Jae would come. He read it in the small sitting room downstairs, at the low table where his mother took her morning tea, while Ji Yeon sat in the armchair by the window with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the persimmon sapling outside. It took him 41 minutes. He read some pages twice. He set the folder down on the table when he was done, and he closed it, and he ran his thumb along the edge once, and he did not speak for a long moment. Then he asked her 3 questions, in the order in which they came to him. "How long have you known?" 2 years and 11 months, she said. "Why did you not come to me?" She looked at him then, for the first time since he had sat down. Her eyes were the same eyes he had watched close in a hospital room on the 14th floor of Asan Medical Center at 4:12 in the morning on the 3rd of October, 2017, and they were also not the same eyes at all. "Because for the first year and a half," she said, "you would not have believed me. And by the time you would have, your mother was worse, and I was the only one she was letting sit with her at night. And if I had left to make you believe me, she would have been alone." That was the second quotable line. He asked the third question then, the one he had not known until he opened his mouth, that he was going to ask. "Why did you come back at all?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked down at her hands, at the small burn scar on the inside of her left wrist. "Because your mother once took my hands at her kitchen table and told me I was her daughter," she said. "Not the wife of her son, her daughter, and I told her yes. And when a woman like your mother tells you yes back in a language that is not her first language, in a kitchen that smells of doenjang, you do not get to unsay it later because a court in Seocho signs a paper." That was the third quotable line. He looked at the folder on the table. He looked at Ji Yeon, who had not moved. Adaeze spoke again, more quietly. I did not come back for you, Min Jae-ya. I want you to hear that clearly, because if you do not hear it clearly, you will make the wrong decision in the next room, and again in the room after that. I came back for the woman upstairs. I came back for the child we buried in Paju under a stone with 2 names on it. I came back because there is a version of you that I loved for 7 years, and that version is still somewhere in the man sitting in front of me, worth keeping alive long enough to do one honest thing before he dies. I did not come back for the man who signed the divorce, and I will not stay for him either. Do you understand what I am telling you? That was the 4th quotable line, and it ran to precisely the length a woman uses when she has rehearsed a sentence for 3 years in the dark beside another woman's bed, and has decided, tonight, to say it once, and never again. He said yes. He said it once. He did not look up. Ji Yeon rose from the armchair. She crossed the room. She stood behind him for a moment with her hand not quite touching his shoulder, and then she withdrew the hand, and she said, in a voice that had in it none of the girl she had been at the gala 6 hours earlier, I will go back to the city tonight. My driver's outside. She looked at Adaeze. Thank you for taking care of his mother, she said. She meant it. Then she left the room, and the front door of the Hanok opened and closed, and a car started in the courtyard, and the gravel made the small, crushed shell sound gravel makes under the tires of a car that is not coming back. The boardroom was on the 41st floor. He arrived at 10:14 the following morning. He had not slept. He had shaved. He wore the same navy overcoat. He carried a leather portfolio that Adaeze had prepared, and a small USB drive in the inside pocket of his jacket, and he sat down at the head of the long walnut table, in the chair he had sat in for 11 years, and he waited for the 8 men who had built their careers under him to file in. Hyung-nim came in last, as he always did, in a charcoal suit and the gold pocket square he had worn at Min Jae's wedding. He sat at Min Jae's right hand, as he always did. He smiled the smile of a man who had not yet been informed of anything, though the smile did not, quite, reach the eyes. Min Jae placed the objects on the table, one at a time. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He placed a printed wire record from Leibuan, dated the 14th of March, 2019. He placed a notarized statement from Zurich, 4 pages, in German, with a certified Korean translation stapled behind it. He placed the coroner's note on Mr. Beck. He placed a printout of Seongdo Maritime Trust's beneficial ownership resolution, 11 layers deep, with the name at the bottom highlighted in a single, narrow band of yellow. He placed the USB drive on top of the stack. He set his hand on the drive and left it there for a moment. Tae Huna, he said quietly, is there anything you would like to say before I ask the others to leave the room? The board went still. The word Tae Huna, the diminutive of childhood, the name only the inner circle used, the name Hyung-nim had answered to at Min Jae's father's funeral in the winter of 2014, hung in the air the way a struck bell hangs. Hyung-nim did not answer. He looked at the papers. He looked at the drive. He looked, for a long moment, at Min Jae's hand. He did not open his mouth. He did not close his eyes. He did not, in any way a camera could have recorded, do anything at all. That silence was the 5th quotable line, and the writer of this account will mark it here, once, because it is the silence that made everything that followed possible. Min Jae let the silence sit for the length of a breath he did not take. Then he said, to the room, please, leave us. The 7 other men rose without looking at Hyung-nim and left. The door closed. The 2 men sat at the walnut table for 11 minutes without speaking. When Min Jae rose to leave, he touched Hyung Nim once, lightly, on the shoulder, the way a younger brother touches an older brother he is releasing from a promise. And then he walked out and did not look back. The court order was filed at 3:47 p.m. under docket 2025-Hyung-Sang-1147, the freezing of 11 accounts across Labuan, the Caymans, Singapore, and Zurich, the referral of Cho Tai-hoon to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office for investigation into aggravated fraud, breach of fiduciary trust, and complicity in the deaths of Rahim bin Yusuf, Lim Wei Ling, and Baek Seung Hwan. The press conference was held on the 23rd of November at 11 a.m. in the lobby of the prosecutor's office in Seocho. Min Jae did not attend. He drove instead to the cemetery in Paju. He walked the long path to the stone with 2 names on it. He sat on the cold ground in front of the stone for 41 minutes, and he did not cry, and he did not speak. And when he stood up, his knees were stiff, and his coat was wet at the hem from the frost. And he brushed it off and drove back to Yangpyeong and sat in the kitchen of the hanok, while his mother slept upstairs, and Mrs. An made him a bowl of samgyetang he did not eat. He began the courtship of a forgiveness he did not expect to be granted. He did not text Adaiz. He did not call her. He learned from Mrs. An on which mornings she came to Yangpyeong, and on those mornings he left the hanok before she arrived and returned in the late evening after she had gone. On a Tuesday in the first week of December, he left at the front gate of her apartment building in Mapo-gu, a wooden box of 11 pairs from Naju. On the following Tuesday, he left a jar of doenjang his mother had made in the autumn of 2023, sealed with wax, wrapped in a linen cloth that had belonged to his halmioni. On the third Tuesday, he left a slim book of poems by Kim Hyasun, with a single page marked by a folded corner. He left no notes with any of them. He left no name. She knew. On the fourth Tuesday, in the second week of January, she came to the hanok in the afternoon while he was still there. She sat down at the kitchen table across from him, in the chair his mother had sat at ease in 11 years earlier, and she did not take off her coat. "I will not be your wife again," she said. "I will not take your name. I will not come back to your house. I will not stand beside you at a gala or a funeral or a christening or in any room in which we would be photographed. I will not accept money from you, personally or through your companies, ever. I will come to Yangpyeong on the mornings I have been coming. I will sit with your mother until she does not need me anymore, and then I will not sit with her, and neither of us will speak of that day when it comes. You will not make it harder for me by asking for more. Do you understand?" He said, "Yes." That was the 6th quotable line, and it was hers, and it stood. The elder came on a Sunday in late January, in the 8th week after the boardroom. She came without warning in a taxi from Incheon, an old woman in a wax print gel and a heavy black wool coat with 2 suitcases and a small carved box under her arm. She was Adaizi's mother, Mrs. Chinelo Okafor, 73, widowed since 2011, retired headmistress of a girls' school in Enugu, and she had, Min Jae realized when he opened the door of the hanok and saw her standing in the courtyard, come without telling her daughter. She sat at his mother's bedside for 2 hours in the morning. The 2 women, one Igbo, one Korean, spoke very little. His mother's English had never been strong, and Mrs. Okafor's Korean was 3 sentences she had learned on the plane. They held hands. They looked at the persimmon sapling. His mother slept. Mrs. Okafor came downstairs at 11, and she asked, in the English of a woman who had taught grammar for 40 years, whether Min Jae would sit with her in the sitting room. She opened the carved box on the low table. Inside were 2 things: a photograph, black and white, of a young woman in a white blouse standing on the steps of a courthouse in Enugu in 1988. And a court judgment in English, 4 pages. The paper yellowed, the seal still legible. The young woman in the photograph was Chiamaka Okafor, Adaize's older sister, 22 years old in the photograph, 29 years old on the Enugu-Onitsha Expressway on the 11th of June, 2008, when the lorry that killed her had, according to a court in a state in Nigeria in 1988, been owned by a transport company whose license had been suspended and then reinstated by a judge who had, 3 months later, purchased a house he could not have afforded on his salary. The judgment was the reinstatement. The judge's name was on the 3rd page. It had never been overturned. Mrs. Okafor said, in her careful headmistress English, that Adaize had studied forensic accounting because of that judgment, that she had gone to LSE because of that judgment, that she had come to Korea in 2014 because a professor at LSE had told her that the best cross-border AML program in Asia was at Yonsei, that she had met Min Jae at a fundraiser 6 weeks after arriving, that she had married him because she had loved him, and she had loved him because he had, on the first night, taken her to a fish market at 4 in the morning and had not asked her a single question about her sister until she had chosen to tell him herself in a taxi at 6. That she had stayed with his mother after the divorce because his mother had been the first woman in Korea who had taken her hands at a kitchen table and told her she was a daughter. And Adaize had lost enough daughters and sisters and mothers in one life already. Mrs. Okafor asked one thing. She asked him to sign a paper. The paper established a foundation, registered in Seoul and in Enugu, funded from a portion of the recovered assets from the Labuan Trust, in the joint names of Chiamaka Ngozi Okafor and Chidinma Hyerin Kang. The foundation would fund forensic accounting scholarships for young women from Nigeria and Korea at Yonsei and at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. There would be 41 scholarships in the first cohort. The board would include Mrs. Okafor, Min Jae's mother while she was able, and Adaize, and no one named Kang after that. Min Jae signed the paper. He signed without reading past the 3rd page. This time, the not reading was the gift. He set the pen down and he bowed to Mrs. Okafor from the sitting position, his forehead almost touching the low table, and she put her hand very briefly on the back of his head, the way an aunt in Enugu blesses a nephew she has decided, against her better judgment, to keep. And she said softly in Igbo, "O di ma," and she did not translate it, and he did not ask. That was the 7th quotable line, though neither of them knew the language of the other well enough to be certain which of them had spoken it. The photograph in the hallway of the Hanok in Yangpyeong hangs to this day in a plain wooden frame between the door to the sitting room and the door to the kitchen. It is not the photograph of Chiamaka on the courthouse steps in Enugu in 1988. It is not the photograph of Chidinma Hyerin at her 100-day rice ceremony in April of 2016. It is a photograph taken by Mrs. On a Sunday morning in March of the following year, with the small camera she keeps for the household records, of 4 people at the kitchen table having breakfast. An elderly Korean woman in a pale blue cardigan, a younger Nigerian woman in a gray wool sweater pouring her tea, a Nigerian grandmother in a wax print geel, laughing at something the elderly Korean woman has just said, in a language she does not speak, and a man in a white shirt sitting one chair back from the table, watching them, not eating, not speaking, present. The caption beneath the frame is written in 3 scripts in Mrs. On's careful hand. In Hangul, Urijib, in Latin letters, Anyi Nwe Ulo A, and in a single line of English beneath both. This is our house. March 17th, 2026. A man buries his enemy and pours himself a drink at the head of a long table. A man buries the version of himself who thought he had earned the table and pours the tea for the woman who was already sitting at it before he came home. If you have stayed with us to the last minute of this chapter, you already know what the answer to the question in the comments is going to cost you before you type it. So type it anyway. Tell me, in one honest sentence, who kept showing up for the people you loved on the nights you were not there, and what would you sign without reading past the third page to make it right? Then subscribe to Midnight Love Saga and tap the bell, because the next chapter is already sitting on a lacquered table on the 17th floor of a hotel you have never been to, on a red thread waiting for someone 11 floors below to notice it is missing. Come back for it. We saved you a chair.